Welcome to The Explainer. I want you to imagine walking down into a cool, dark root cellar in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Hanging from a heavy wooden beam is a leg of pork, and it's been hanging there for over 4 years. Listen closely. There's no refrigerator humming in the background. There's no vacuum sealer. Absolutely zero electricity. It is literally just salt, air, and patience. Today, we're exploring the Amish dry pack method. It's a fascinating, traditional technique that allows cuts of meat to last for 5 years, or honestly even longer, completely unrefrigerated. Now, I know that sounds practically impossible to our modern ears, but this isn't just folklore. This is a reality happening every single winter in Amish farmhouses.
Okay, let's dive into this and look at the absolute extreme outer limit of this method. I want to introduce you to a man named Amish Stoltzfus from Gordonville, Pennsylvania. Amish had a curing cellar under his farmhouse that his family had been using continuously since 1889. And sitting on a white oak shelf down there, a shelf darkened from over a century of salt vapor, was a single piece of cured ham. His grandmother had originally put this up way back in 1943 during the height of wartime meat rationing. For decades, it just sat there, acting as a sort of family heirloom. It sat on that exact shelf for 74 years.
When Amish passed away in 2017, his grandson finally decided to cut into that 1943 ham. Remember, that's 74 years after it was originally salted. And here is the staggering part. It hadn't spoiled. No way, right? But it was true. It was incredibly dry, heavily concentrated, but entirely edible. The grandson actually described the taste so brilliantly. He said it was like the memory of a thing rather than the thing itself. Now, obviously, you shouldn't aim to keep your meat for 7 decades, but this wild anecdote proves the absolute incredible outer limit of what this preservation technique is fundamentally capable of.
Now, for the Amish families actually using this method today, 74 years definitely isn't the goal. The standard everyday average for this preservation method is about 5 years. And let's just pause and remember, that is 5 years requiring absolutely zero electricity, zero maintenance, and no modern technology whatsoever. But honestly, perhaps the most surprising part of this whole thing is the cost. Start to finish, the entire curing process costs about $2 in salt per cut of meat. $2! To put that into perspective, think about the fraction of the cost that is compared to running a chest freezer year-round or buying those tiny premium packages of cured meats at the grocery store.
Section 1. The Science of Osmosis.
And this brilliantly illustrates that this preservation isn't some kind of rural magic trick. It's just pure, predictable physics. Facts that have been documented by the USDA and agricultural universities for centuries. You know, we usually think of salt purely as a flavor enhancer for our fries, but in traditional curing, it's actually a tool of physics. Through the process of osmosis, the salt literally pulls water right out of the cells of the meat. So why does that matter? Well, because all bacteria need water to live and reproduce. By removing that moisture, the salt creates this incredibly harsh, arid environment where microscopic life simply cannot exist.
The magic number you want to remember here is 10 to 12%. Once the salt concentration inside that piece of meat reaches the 10 to 12% threshold, absolutely no harmful bacteria can survive. We're not just talking about your standard, everyday spoilage bacteria either. This environment is totally lethal to really tough bugs like Staphylococcus. And most importantly, it entirely prevents the growth of Clostridium botulinum, the bacterium that causes botulism. The meat essentially enters a suspended state of preservation that can last for years.
Which brings us to a really fascinating contrast. The Amish method relies purely on that high concentration of plain salt. But modern commercial cured meats, think about the standard bacon, deli ham, or pepperoni you grab at the supermarket, they take a totally different route. Since the 1920s, the commercial industry has relied super heavily on chemical sodium nitrites or nitrates. You've probably heard of it referred to as pink curing salt. Those chemicals are what give commercial meat that bright pink color and block botulism. But the Amish, they haven't used them. They've been doing this for 250 years with just plain salt and without a single recorded trace of food poisoning.
Section 2. Finding your curing chamber.
Now, you might be thinking you need to pack up, move to a farm, or build a custom smokehouse to pull this off. But actually, if your house was built before 1980, there's a really high probability you already have a perfect curing chamber sitting completely unused, right under your feet. We are looking for temperatures between 50 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit and humidity hovering right around 65%. Historically, a root cellar was absolutely perfect for this, but today, honestly, a simple corner in a basement, specifically the one farthest away from your furnace and against a north foundation wall, often perfectly replicates those exact historical conditions. And if you have a newer build, an unheated garage attached to the north side of your house, or even just a dedicated north-facing closet, can perfectly maintain this cool, dry, dark, and stable environment.
Section 3. The dry pad method.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how incredibly simple the actual step-by-step methodology is once you have your curing environment set up. It requires no specialized machinery at all, just basic supplies you probably already have or can grab for a few bucks. Here's the whole timeline in 5 easy steps. First, you pack the meat in plain salt. Second, you let time do the work. The wait time depends entirely on the size of the meat, anywhere from 7 to 14 days for small cuts, all the way up to 40 days or more for a whole ham. Third is the secret 72-hour rest, which we'll break down in a second. Fourth, you rinse and wrap the meat in breathable cotton. And finally, step 5, you literally just hang it from a hook and leave it alone to age. That is the whole shebang.
Let's look a little closer at that first packing step. The general rule of thumb, which actually matches modern guidelines from the National Center for Home Food Preservation, is to use exactly 1/4 cup of plain salt per pound of meat. So you take a wooden box or a stoneware crock and you lay down a thick bed of plain salt. And this is absolutely crucial. Ensure the salt has no iodine and no anti-caking agents in it. Just pure salt. Place your pork, beef, or venison right on top and then cover it completely. You literally just pour on the salt until absolutely no flesh is visible.
Section 4. The secret 72-hour rest.
Most standard curing guides out there will tell you to pull the meat out of the salt, rinse it off immediately, and hang it right up. But an Amish farmer named Aaron, who actually learned this from a small leather-bound notebook his grandfather kept all the way back in 1869, revealed the essential technique that prevents the meat from going rancid. It's called the salt rest. When you pull the meat from the salt pack, do not rinse it immediately. Instead, you let the meat sit entirely uncovered on a wooden rack in the cool air of your cellar for exactly 72 hours. During those 3 days, the surface of the meat dries out and forms what charcuterie experts call a pelle. It's basically a tough, protective rind. Only after this pelle has fully set do you go ahead and rinse it.
So the crucial point is that this 72-hour resting phase accomplishes 3 massive things. First, it allows the salt to fully equilibrate and migrate all the way to the dead center of the meat, which totally eliminates any bland spots. Second, it dries the surface so completely that mold literally cannot establish a foothold during the long-hanging cure. And third, and this is for the foodies, it triggers an enzymatic breakdown of proteins into amino acids, specifically glutamic acid. This is exactly what creates that incredibly deep, savory, almost mushroom-like umami flavor that factory-processed meats literally can never replicate.
Okay, so after those 72 hours are up, you finally rinse the salt off, pat it dry, and then comes the final preparation, wrapping. The meat absolutely must be wrapped in a clean, breathable cotton flour sack, or honestly, even just a simple thrift store pillowcase works perfectly. You must never, ever use plastic, butcher paper, or aluminum foil. The cotton is non-negotiable because it allows the meat to continue breathing, it absorbs any tiny amounts of surface moisture, keeps dust and pests away, and most importantly, it prevents the buildup of trapped gases that would otherwise cause the fat to go completely rancid.
Section 5. Why America Forgot.
While the process is incredibly cheap, simple, and effective, it begs a pretty massive question. Why did this vanish from mainstream American kitchens? Why aren't these instructions just printed on the back of every bag of salt you buy at the grocery store? Well, if we trace the timeline neutrally, Anabaptist families brought this tradition over to Pennsylvania around 1737. By the 1950s, the commercial meat packing plants were standardizing those chemical nitrates we talked about earlier. But the real shift happened between the late 1970s and the 1990s when the USDA introduced the HACP framework. That stands for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point. It's a very complex regulatory framework. Now, it didn't ban home curing, but it made the compliance and inspection costs for small commercial family curing houses incredibly expensive. Local country stores simply couldn't afford to sell great-grandfather's ham anymore. So the knowledge shifted into large industrial factories, while the Amish, who were just curing for themselves and didn't cross state lines for commerce, quietly kept the tradition alive in their own basements.
Ultimately, this explainer isn't just about preserving meat. It's about preserving knowledge that was almost entirely lost to commercial convenience. It proves that with just a couple of dollars of salt, a dark corner of a basement, and the basic physics of osmosis, you can reclaim some profound culinary independence. So I want to leave you with a provocative thought to chew on today. What was the first food your grandmother made that you have never been able to find again in any store? Think about the unique traditions that might have faded in your own family over the years, and perhaps consider what lost knowledge you might just be able to bring back to life.